Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes, get those notifications up, out, and if anybody is up this late, welcome, welcome. Pop in, say hi. In the meantime, you guys, it has been a day. It has been a day of kindnesses. It's been a day of fresh air. It's been a day that I had to go to the dentist today, and oh, I do not like metal on my teeth. And they scraped every little bit of tartar, probably 20 years worth of tartar at the very least, off my bottom deck, and my gums are aching me. And I said, oh my goodness, it's Friday. There's no way that I cannot show up. I would show up no matter what. But then I thought, maybe we'll just pull a card and we'll make it short. But I'm going to give myself a few minutes in this introduction and seeing who pops in, feeling out the moment that I'm in, just to see if anything surfaces on its own. And if not, I'm good to go. I'm just gonna pull a card. We'll go into it for a few minutes just in a perspective. But I thought maybe, I had a post come across my path today. Okay, I wasn't. Here it is. I had a post come across my path today, and they were saying that it's easier and better for us to accept our situations, to accept the downfalls, to accept where we find ourselves in the moment, and to accept, right, the sources of that uncomfortableness or the sources of the problems that we're in, right? And do that rather than forgive. I'm kind of on the fence with this one because I believe in forgiveness. I had an opportunity when I first woke up to some of these ideas to truly divvy out some forgiveness, you know, to maybe not right the wrong, but for my own sense of well being and for the well being of the soul that was in the moment of passing on. Passing on to what? I'm not sure, but I am most positive passing on to something, passing on to maybe another chance, maybe another opportunity to try and get whatever they got wrong right. And also maybe to recognize in what they thought they were doing wrong, or the negative, that's not the right way to put it, the maybe the guilt and the shame and the knowing that they got wrong, to be able to find a little bit of forgiveness in themselves, in having forgiveness offered to them. And yet, I still believe that sometimes we just have to accept. Sometimes we don't get that opportunity to forgive, or sometimes we get that knowing that we have an opportunity. Well, not have the opportunity, but knowing we could have forgiven, but that opportunity has passed. And that wasn't the case for me. When my mother passed away, we had a lot between us. I don't know why I was granted the gift of being able to recognize jealousy and resentment. I didn't understand why there was jealousy and resentment because, well, at that time anyway, I didn't understand why there was jealousy and resentment because I felt so low of myself. I felt that I had nothing to contribute to the world, let alone have something to contribute to myself. And I felt like a zero, a loser, right? My entire life. And yet I felt it, I sensed it, and I forced it. I forced that admittance, right? Because I needed to know, I needed it out of the horse's mouth, right? I needed it out of the horse's mouth. And again, these are opportunities that could pass you by before you realize that they are actually opportunities. That person that you need to forgive, or that person that you find that you wish that you had the opportunity to ask forgiveness from them, and maybe they've passed on. Maybe they've totally walked out of your life and you will never have that opportunity to do that. That wasn't the case for me. But if it was the same, right? If I didn't have that opportunity to forgive, I would at that point say yes, right? Acceptance is the route that you have to go. Acceptance for the situation, accept that you have no say, acceptance that there's nothing that you can do. And you have to roll with that, right? You have to roll with the consequences of that. Lots of times there are consequences. And even though, nobody in particular, right, is going to find you out or chase you down, maybe you'll never be charged with that crime, right? Technically, you got away with it, but you know for yourself. And if you have some understandings, they call it karma, right? I think they call it karma. I haven't delved in, I should delve into the idea of karma. It has come across my path, but only in referencing as when somebody's come in to teach you a lesson and go, oh, that's their karma. And that's about as far into it as I've ever gotten. But that's a really great suggestion for myself that I should delve into that topic deeply so I have a better understanding, so that maybe in these conversations with myself and with other people, hello, Hannah, that, we could better find moments to make our wrongs right, or make those moments available to somebody else that they might do that for themselves, right? And like I said, when my mother passed away, my sisters, right, they didn't know how to talk about death. We had no idea, of the whether she wanted to be cremated or buried, or whether she wanted to be taken to British Columbia, where my dad was buried, and be buried with him, or if she wanted to stay close to her kids and her grandkids and be buried, in a cemetery here. My sisters just could not do those kind of conversations. And, they asked me to talk to her before she passed away. We didn't get much notice before she passed away. It was just over a week from when we found out that she had cancer, right? That she was going to pass away, and we had to move pretty quickly. And pretty much up to the end, right? She thought at the very least that there was a possibility that, that this could be fixed, right? And it was very difficult for the family to accept. For myself, I accepted right away because I didn't expect there was any opportunity to forgive. Like, we had those hash outs of those experiences that we had. We talked it over, right? No really any reconciliation within those conversations. And I just kind of accepted the situation. So when my sisters asked me to do it, I love my sisters. I didn't want them to go through that pain. So for me, it was nothing. It was just a conversation with somebody, right? Because I had accepted my relationship with this person who was my mother, right? There was a lot of brokenness, a lot of pain and hurt and betrayal, jealousy, resentment, confusion. And to me, it was nothing. And so, it was the night before she passed away. There were coincidences and serendipities and breadcrumbs in that. But I sat at the edge of her bed and I rubbed her forehead. And, I didn't like to touch my mother. She didn't like to be touched. She never kissed or hugged or told any of us, that she loved us. And it was very uncomfortable. But the moment we were in that connection, at that moment, it seemed important that we made that physical connection. So as I talked to her, the doctors took her off the spacey medicine and stuff that she was on so that we could have a decent conversation. And I rubbed her forehead through it and had that conversation, asked her all these questions that my sister wanted to know. But in that conversation, I had my very first experience of waking up to some of these ideas. And in that moment, I forgave everything, right? And even though my mother never said sorry for anything, but I could tell in her eyes and in her acceptance of where she was in the moment that she had recognized that she had, at the very least, made some mistakes, right? That she had made some serious mistakes. And that was good enough for me. And in that moment, I changed. And that word forgiveness was my very first word that I moved in everything for probably a year after she passed away. Everything was about forgiveness. There was so much that needed to come out of my system, that needed to be resolved. But like I said, not everybody gets to have that opportunity, right? Lots of times the kids leave the house and they never come back, right? That somebody passes away, and then at that moment, again, there's no opportunity to forgive except possibly in having your own experience, offer up some forgiveness for yourself. It was a mutual forgiveness for me and my mother, but I also recognize that lots of people need the forgiveness being asked of them, right? And it's not fair to put somebody in a position to do the forgiving if it's not warranted, if it's not their fault, if truly the pain and the heartbreak, the brutality, the devastation, the rejection, all of that, right, doesn't deserve forgiveness. And sometimes you'll never get that opportunity to get to that point. But what you can do is accept it for what it is, accept it for how it ended, accept that you can't do anything about it, and just, I wouldn't say let it go, because these things imprint on us so hard that if we don't try to resolve them, if just for ourselves, that they'll carry on. And I'm somebody, right? Cindy's never coming back, right? I am a unique in who I am. But I believe that there are parts of me that most definitely are coming back. And, that next human being that they partner with might be a Joe, might be a Joanne, right? Might be a full adult, might be a senior or close to it, like I was. I was 57 years old before I really started kicking into the lessons. And I went hard in them, right? Because I didn't know how far behind I was. And, not knowing what I was doing, I just accepted the state that I was in and allowed myself to be pulled into it. So grateful for the age of, right, AI learning, that it became a much easier process for me than it would have been for somebody else that may have woken up to those ideas 10 or 20 or 30 or even 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 lifetimes ago, right? That maybe, right, I made a lot more movement than what would be the norm, but a lot less movement in comparison as to those who come after me. So this is why I come in here and I share these in the moment, maybe wacky conversations that not truly understood. But YouTube is forever. Google is forever. And it is in my optimistic ideas that, when they've sourced everything out and cannot come up with an idea of a truth or a solution or a right way or direction, that maybe they'll find themselves on the doorstep. And, Cindy will be gone. But when I come in, like I said tonight, when I came in, I'll give it a couple minutes and then I'll go just pull a card, right? Because I was so tired. My gums and my teeth are kind of buzzing. It's just a week of body parts buzzing for me. That if I couldn't surface, right? Those other parts of me couldn't surface with the lesson, then I would just go in for a card, right? And the 54 powerful words, then that's easy for Cindy to move into. And at that point, maybe something would come in, right? That's the parts that are coming back, right? Those are the parts that exist beyond this existence of Cindy, right? And, but for the answers that I needed, for the little bit of understanding and reconciliation, because even though I recognized jealousy and resentment, I didn't understand it. And that's what I really wanted to understand. And it was offered to me when I decided, out of the pursuit of a career, right? Because that's what I was deciding on. Like, I went through content of hundreds of thought leadership and people who had made some movement for themselves and been successful in life on their own terms. And it took me a long time to decide how I wanted to move in the rest of my life, right? Again, I had no idea, but I allowed myself to be pulled into the content, and I am so grateful, right, that I happened on to a gentleman's name, Evan Carmichael. If you want to check him out, he's on YouTube, and he specializes in, right, putting out thought leadership from many leaders from different platforms, whether they're religious or spiritual or political or in acting or in sports or in teaching. It's just an appetizer platter. And I went in there to see who I could resonate with, who I could who I could follow suit in and make a career of it for myself, put a roof over my head. Because in the beginning, it was all about putting a roof over my head. I wanted to be a YouTube superstar. I wanted to be a Logan Paul, right? I wanted to be absolutely huge. And you know, it took some lessons, but I understood that being an urban explorer and an adventure was not going to be an adventurer, wouldn't be something that I would be able to pursue for the rest of my life because eventually, right, by the time I got things packed and right, knew my stuff and was able to come to the platform and have something to lay across the table that would be useful to others, right? That it would be, right? I would be a senior. This is what I thought. I would be like 80, 90 years old before I was good enough to show up and have a voice in what I had learned and what I had experienced in the process. And gratefully, that wasn't again AI learning, right? And finding great content and people making movement for themselves. And yeah, I bit onto it pit bull, like a pit bull with a piece of raw meat in my mouth, and I wasn't going to let go until I had touched base with what I wanted to contribute. And I happened on to a lady. Her name is Ivana Chubbuck, and um, she's a acting coach of the strangest things because I am not I'm not interested in acting, right? I do work in social media and in communication, and I love drama. In my senior years, I love drama only because it helped me to come out. It helped me to find my voice. It helped me to recognize possibly that I might have even been okay at it. But I didn't want to be an actor. I actually wanted to be a makeup artist, right? I wanted to be a makeup artist in movies and in theaters, but to be able to do scary faces like the FX stuff, right? And at that time, that stuff wasn't in existence. Whatever you wanted to do like that, it was by your own skill of being creative in the products that you use in order to make the character. Okay, so anyway, I found this amazing lady, and her idea for the actors were to be able to act in a way that people could pick up on their emotions by attaching their acting scenes out of from their true experiences in life. And I thought, oh my goodness, in my experiences, I can pull up those emotions, right? Like I went through the ringer of every single emotion that you could possibly think of. And in all the change that I had gone through in my life and that adapt and conquer and having those opportunities in all those schools that I went to. I went to a lot of schools growing up, right? I think it was like 11 elementary schools. I only went to 2 high schools, but I went to a lot of schools. And that was a lot of change because every time I went to a different school, I took it on as an opportunity to course correct and make some slight changes so that maybe I might be acceptable, more digestible to others, right? Wow, there's a flow for you tonight. So I happened onto her content and I thought, oh my goodness, this is for me. And like I said, that took me over a year to have that served to me, right? Not recognizing where it was going to take me, but I resonated with so much that I allowed myself to be pulled in to emotions. And that's when I started getting answers for myself and being able to delve deep and to do a little bit of shadow work. And I don't know if she even had anything to do with shadow work, but and allowing myself to be pulled into the lessons, those lessons took me in directions that were so off base from where I wanted to be and putting a roof over my head. But it was serving me so well every month, every year. And it took me years, right? I just felt better and better and better. And I understood, and it made that moment that I had with my mother such a focal point in my lessons because it was a true example of what forgiveness could offer up in clearing the pathway for the next lesson, right? They were like prerequisites. Every lesson was like a prerequisite of what was to come next, right? I'm waving my hands a little bit more today because I came back into my video. Try not to go off the side of the main branch too far so I don't lose it. But last night I came into my live show and I watched it for myself for lessons. I do it all the time. I come in because I understand these flows like I'm talking about. That sometimes I just go into it and I gotta do the thumbnail and put the title in, and I take the lesson for myself and I sit through it, and there's always a lesson for me. But I noticed that my fan, because I was waving my hands, that it was interfering with the sound. And it was such a great lesson, at least for myself yesterday. It was such a great lesson. And I sat through it anyway, but, that little bit of YouTube creator and me kind of picking it apart and going, oh, Cindy, you should be wearing your wireless microphone and right? You should be doing the lighting better. You should turn the fan off, which I did, but I got a little sweat going on, right? And turning off the fan. And it's a fairly cool evening too, right? But yeah, I get into these flows and I feel like I'm in a sauna sometimes, right? Okay, so back to the main branch of the tree. You know, all you have to do is get started, right? For me, the word was forgiveness. Let me pull my cards here because this is a good example. I have 54 powerful words. I have 56 cards here. Two of the cards are copies, right? Because they deserve to be copies. And in the experiences of when I was doing those two cards, it called to be done again. So I let two of the words were acceptance. It was acceptance was one of the words that I did twice, and the other word, surprisingly, and not surprisingly, it just makes 100%. uh it just makes sense because it was this Evan Carmichael's one word, believe, right? And that one was done twice. 54 powerful words. So my first word, and I've had many, right, um, main words, right? But I think the most important one has been change. But that's going to change too, guaranteed, because I've changed my one words more times than I changed my underwear in a week. That's how many times that I have moved from these words because I work with them. And then, like a prerequisite, it's only the prerequisite for the next one. And that's how I make my movement. My first one word was forgiveness. And I think I ran with that word for a year. And like I said, it served me well. It got me deep into the lessons. They call it shadow work, right? And I at that time, I'm just dipping my toes in. If I had to do it again, I would just go in hard, right? But it was confusing. It was making me look like a little bit wacky because I didn't know anybody who was doing that, right? But I felt pulled into it, and in the little breadcrumbs and in that you're on the right track feelings and seeing the evidence in my own life that, right, that I felt better. I understood better. I was able to forgive easier. That was everything. That was it was had nothing to do with money, had nothing to do with putting the roof over my head, and had everything to do with, and even at that time I didn't know it, but healing in all those hurts, all those misunderstandings, all those directives and projections, and right, and understanding the jealousy and the resentment directed at me when I had no clue, because I didn't think I had anything in me that anybody would be jealous of, because, I always thought I was, right? This is what I thought. And, I think a whole lot differently now, not in a narcissistic, I know better than you kind of idea, right? Because I still am a little bit anxious sometimes about having these kind of conversations, right? Because I understand that not a lot of people are going to understand these conversations. Interesting you're speaking on this subject today. My mother's funeral was today. Oh my goodness. Hannah, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that. Right? But the serendipities and the breadcrumbs in our life, and I'm so sorry to hear that. But yeah, you have a good evening and a good day, and I will talk to you, Hannah. And Hannah, why don't you get a hold of me through Instagram messaging there, and me and you will have a private conversation, right? Right? I'm a good ear. I'm just not a yapper. I'm a good ear too. And right, there's a reason maybe sometimes that these conversations surface the way that they do. So yeah, most definitely, Hannah. Uh, Message me if you want to. Right? I know it's been probably a very heavy week for you and very sad, but you know, message me if you want to have this conversation. And if you come in tomorrow to finish, uh, right, listening to my live, right? My heart's with you, right? Because death, no matter what that relationship is, it's a toughie. It's a toughie, right? Okay, with my cards, I was going to say forgiveness was my first word, right? Forgiveness was my first word, and I ran with that word. But out of the 54 powerful words here, let's just pull one. Maybe this was your word. Here's a word: inspiration. Inspiration is the realization that we can aspire to that too. And that's a word that I could have easily worn when I had first been introduced to Ivana's Chubbuck's content, right? I could have chomped on that because she inspired me, right? She inspired me to believe that I could do that too, right? Right? In understanding my own emotions, understanding where I got things wrong, to be able to serve others because I could come to the table understanding, right? That I could pull that up and make it serve out there. And how did I even know that? It was just like in the very beginning, I was just stepping my toes into these lessons, right? But like I said, it could have been any word. It could have been freedom. It could have been tenderness. It could have been perseverance. It could have been believe, right? It could have been believe. And it took me a long time to believe. It took a lot of breadcrumbs, a lot of serendipities, a lot of truths that surfaced that just kind of blew my mind that I just couldn't argue that it was a possibility that happened just by accident, right? But in this conversation, lots of times we don't have the opportunity to forgive, right? Forgiveness for me is a it was a hard one. It was. But I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to forgive and be forgiven, right? It doesn't mean that, that those other parts of me are ever going to have any trust in the other parts of my mother, right? Because as much of those other parts of me are coming back, those other parts of my mother will be coming back and she will just be evolving. But I fully believe that that relationship has been cut off, but cut off to say, I understand, like you just weren't ready for those relationships. You weren't ready to grow. You weren't ready to give up on the jealousy and the resentment. And I wasn't ready, right? I wasn't ready to give you another chance, right? And that's the truth. And I believe that as much as I got lessons in that, those other parts of me may have been trapped for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime with those understandings of another person's soul, right? Or another person's many parts, however you want to look at that. And, right, just feeding, because that's what it is, just feeding on somebody that's trying to come to the surface but doesn't have a chance because that's what's going on with them. And lots of times it's just in survival, it's just in, right? It's just in fear, it's just in somebody else trying to make some movement for themselves, but doing it at someone or something else's expense, right? And that took some lessons. That took a long time, and that was a toughy one to absorb. But in the evidence and in the breadcrumbing and the serendipity and in the lessons, it was a truth that I just did not want to accept. But in the end, right? The truth always, right, might not have happened for me in this lifetime. It was in my choices. It was always in my choices. And it's in somebody else's choices if we're going to interact that way. There's always an opportunity to do better by ourselves 100%, right? Um, so if forgiveness is not a possibility, right? If forgiveness, for whatever reason, if it's out of stubbornness and you don't have that answer yet, there's not a chance. You have no idea what that person, what that soul did to me. You have no idea of the damage, right? That you just can't find it in yourself to offer up that forgiveness. Then you don't have any other choice than to use acceptance. And acceptance would be totally acceptable because you really don't have any choice, right? Because you have to make movement for yourself no matter what. But you're going to do that movement. You'll have to understand that maybe in the next lifetime, right? That you'll have to work with that word. You'll have to work on that relationship because that relationship will come right back into your life, right? It'll come right back into your life and it'll just be in repeat and repeat. And who's to say, right? How many lifetimes that that's been squashed, that has not been able to surface because it was dictated that it wasn't going to, not by myself or those other parts of me, by something outside of us, right? Something that was possibly jealous and resentful, right? Possibly by something or someone that was just scared and desperate, right? But that doesn't mean that you forgive and you bring them back on board. No, you gone right to the end of the line, as far away from me and those other parts of me. That's how far you go back. And part of what I do is in taking those lessons to assure and make sure that every part of me understands properly, right? It has to be properly because, we always feel like we've been wrong. So we have to accept our part in whatever's happened, right? But each one of us gets to decide what's most important, what's the lesson, what's the powerful word that in this moment is so important, right? And here, look at that gratefulness right on the very, very top deck. And this was the word for me today. I was so grateful for the day that I had today. Right? I do not like plaque removal. I would much rather you yank out all my teeth than scrape them all and get all that plaque off. It's just, right? It's a traumatizing for me again as a child, right? My mother was very adamant. Her weapon of choice was a back scratcher, these little wooden back scratchers that had a little hand. And she was like a ninja across the dining room table on that if you had your elbows on the table. But if you clanked your teeth with your fork, if you touched your teeth with it drove her crazy. And oh yeah, she was like a ninja. So when I'm sitting, right, I'm sitting in the dentist chair and I'm rubbing my leg, and in my mind I'm thinking, it's all going to be over. Just a few more minutes. And I said that for like 20 minutes, half an hour, right? It's almost over. It's almost over. And I'm comforting myself, right? I'm rubbing my legs, but all I'm thinking is, oh my God, right? I'm clanked this metal on my teeth, and this is the worst feeling. And it was just, my whole head was vibrating in emotion, not necessarily pain, right? Right? It was just metal on teeth, but from emotional experience I had as a kid, it was there and it was uncomfortable. And every time they pulled out a swab or something from my mouth, it's all covered in I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm gonna bleed to death. What are you doing? Stop it. Are you almost done? Just funny the the things that we get panicky about. I even know as a kid, how we would fight when it was vaccination time in the schools, and the principal and all the teachers and all the nurses trying to hold me down to try and give me a needle, and I would just be fighting for my life. And they would be so mean about it, right? Because they'd be slapping me and body slamming me, and they'd leave the door open to the medical office, so all the other students in their school, who's screaming? And they, Cindy, right? I'm just like, oh. I could laugh about it. I can laugh about it now. But you know what? Scary is scary, and we don't always get a choice as to what's going to make us feel uncomfortable, right? That just happens as you allow yourself to be pulled in, allow yourself to take the prerequisite lesson that's needed to draw you into the next lesson, right? So grateful for my lessons, so grateful for the characters that I come across my path that I get to emulate in some ways. Emulate, is that a good word? Because it's not copying, because nobody can be Cindy, and I certainly cannot be Ivana Chubbuck, because she's a unique in herself. And like I said, I really did not want to be in acting or anything, but because she works in emotions, right? Even though she trains actors, she trains, oh my goodness, who does she train? John Travolta, Brad Pitt. I'm trying to think of some of the actors that she schools, right? And Sylvester Stallone, I think. Yeah, she worked with a lot of actors, and these are great actors too, right? But that's because they were able to get in touch with their emotions, and that's what started it with me. If I wasn't able to forgive, to learn that lesson to forgive, yes, acceptance would have been a good substitution. But when there's a lot of pain, and if those characters are still kicking around, if there's any way that you can have those conversations, even just for your own well being. I had those conversations with my mother. I didn't get much answers out of it, but sometimes you get more out of what's not said and what's not done as you do from what is done and what is said. And that's the truth. I needed that moment with my mother, and I'm grateful for my sisters into pushing me to have that conversation with my mother. But I was capable of having that conversation because I had accepted my situation, right? And it truly, unfortunately, didn't bother me that she was passing away, right? And isn't that a sad thing that your own child feels that way, right? That that relationship was that broken and that damaged and uncared for. And as much as, right, that it didn't cause me pain, if it was a different situation, it would have been the same way in the opposite way. And I'm not too sure whether or not she would have rubbed my head in that move to help somebody move. And that's the truth. Wow. Okay, that came out of me. I'll come back into my life. Probably not tonight. It is bedtime, and it has been a day. I spent the day at the dentist, then I spent some time with my sisters, and then I walked home, and yeah, got some exercise, and then yeah, ate lots of halakji, pigged out actually, right? But sometimes we do that. I never said that I was perfect. I'm in the lessons. I'm creating the best human being I possibly can, but I'm not perfect. Yeah, that halakji was absolutely delicious as leftovers because that's what I had for dinner yesterday, but I made a ton of it. Okay, you guys, that's it for me tonight. Hannah, like I said, I know you're gone for the night, but if you come back tomorrow and pop in and finish the live because you had to go to bed, right? Message me, get a hold of me. You can get a hold of me through Instagram, and yeah, we'll have a conversation for sure. Everybody, have a great night, and we'll see you Monday. I take Saturdays off. Sometimes I'm online for myself, but I don't go online and serve in any way. So Saturday is my day off. Sunday I'll be back in with my live show, Chatters Live. It's a great show. My crew um, chats more than I do, and I have to say I got the most beautiful gift today, right? One of my subscribers, somebody who's been with me for years, and I'm not going to say subscriber, I'm going to say a friend because we have been friends for a very long time now, but it didn't start that way, right? It didn't start that way. But look at, he gave me a quartz crystal keychain. Not only that, he sent me 2 bags of well-being teas. I've never had steeped tea before, so I'm going to be trying this. Uh, Nettle tea and petal mint tea. So I have 2 teas here that he sent for me. And he sent me a book, right? And my sister's going in for quadruple heart bypass on Monday. I'll be at the hospital all day until they roll her out, and she's in recovery or ICU. She'll be in ICU for a few days. But I have a book that I can read, and right, he's been with me for a long time. He knows me very well, and he picks such beautiful, pertinent gifts that were totally meant for me, right? And even though I've never tried these kind of teas before, right? He sent them to me because I know he knows that I'll like them, right? And sometimes it's just in the thought, right? Because it's not cheap. Postal is very expensive these days. Oh my goodness. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer. If I don't see you Sunday night at Chatters Live, I'll see you Monday. Have a great night.